Here's the deal. Brent's video in this episode is not very good. His audio is just fine. You can hear him all right. We figured we'd still release the video this week just because we know a lot of you enjoy watching instead of just listening. But if you see Brent freeze for long swaths of time, no need to question your reality. Just don't panic. Hello, everyone. I am Cody.
And I'm Brent.
And we are the Hugonauts, here to review and discuss for you the best sci-fi books of all time. And speaking of all time, this week we have one of the most liked, reviewed, read books of all time, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And we'll discuss a little bit of the extended series as well. But make sure you like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Follow, download if you're just listening to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode, which will be on the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. Another one of the kind of smash hits of sci-fi, if we know what we're talking about at all.
You got some more superlatives to throw in here? We got any more bests?
Great, good.
Nice. All right. So, should we talk about Hitchhiker's Guide?
Yeah, let's talk about some Hitchhiker's Guide. Why don't you kick us with a summary?
For sure. So, Hitchhiker's Guide by Douglas Adams is, he calls it a trilogy, but it's 5 books long. Anyway, they're all quite short, roughly 200 pages or 6 hours on audiobook. And we'll just summarize the first one. So this is a really hard book to summarize, but Arthur Dent is a normal man living in England and wakes up one day to bulldozers outside his house. The local council wants to tear down his house and build a highway bypass. And his friend Ford Prefect shows up and convinces him to get up from lying in front of the bulldozers and go down to the pub to get a beer before the world ends. Go down to the pub, get a beer, and then the world does, in fact, end because a Vogon fleet shows up and destroys the entire Earth to make way for an interstellar bypass. Turns out, though, that Ford is an alien hitchhiker who's been stuck on Earth for 15 years waiting for a UFO to fly by, and so they're able to zip up onto the Vogon ship. And then they're off on this unbelievably zany romp around the galaxy as the last survivors from Earth. And that all happens in like the first 6 pages. But that's our setup. It's a super incredibly joke dense and happening dense book, but really fun one. So yeah, that's our setup.
Yeah. And as far as rating, this is one of those tough ones to rate because it's so classic. It's inspired so much that's come after it. Just like rating it purely based on like the reread of the book and some of the series. I give it a 4 out of 5. It's classic for a reason. Just the play on words, the language play that Douglas Adams does is phenomenal. And a lot of the ideas are really funny and interesting too. The characters are fairly flat, which is why it maybe falls short for me. And also there's a little bit of like, it depends on which book in the series you're reading, but a little bit of like pun, joke. It's a like run, But anyways, obviously it's great.
So you're saying you're a curmudgeon and you don't like jokes?
Yeah, I don't
what was your number? Did I miss it?
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5.
And
okay.
and then the second one took a dive for me. The second one I finished, but it pulled me out. And the first one's the reason to be there. But you reread.
Yeah, I read the first one, most of the second one, but I actually also stopped. I did not like the second one very much. I fully just quit. I wasn't enjoying it. But then I picked up the fourth one, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, which I also absolutely loved. It's quite different than the others. It takes place almost exclusively on the Earth, which was destroyed. We weren't lying about that. there's kind of a mystery there. You got to figure it out. You got to read the books to find out. But anyway, I really love that one. It's mostly a love story. It's very cute and still incredibly funny all the way through. So yeah, I'll also give the series a 4 out of 5. The first and the fourth books, I'll both give 4s. The second book, I'd say maybe is like a 2. I mean, I didn't finish it for a reason. I was not having fun.
And I know Douglas Adams has said the third one is his least fit. Like he felt rushed finishing it, and he interjected his like authorial interjections in the text to excuse things. So, anyways, yeah,
for sure.
1 and 4.
Unanimous 4, I guess.
Yeah. And books unanimous 4 on books 1 and 4. Let's get into it. Why don't we start with some plot stuff? What are we doing here? What's interesting?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about the plot because these books are just incredibly fun to read. There's so much going on, but it's not really it is kind of about the plot. The stuff happening does matter. Anyway, it's very interesting to read something, though, where just like the Earth is immediately destroyed and humanity is removed from the picture. It's very different than pretty much anything else you'll ever read. Everybody's always trying to save humanity, but that ship has sailed on like page 8. So that is definitely a really interesting thing about this series.
Yeah, I think that Douglas Adams did a like wonderful job of like showing how unimportant humanity is on a cosmic scale by like the insignificance of the event that takes the Earth out, but then also like making it a very human tale that is fun and emotional still. You know, it's not just about like the cold depths of other alien races and there's nothing you can connect with because they're not human.
Yeah, everyone in the whole universe is very, very human.
Yeah.
No matter how weird they are, they're just like very clearly people doing their own thing. But there is a lot of like, I would call it like plot. There's an incredible amount of joke density in the books. There's also a lot of plot density, particularly in that first book. Like the chapters are very short. Like
it's like a event density.
Yeah, it's like they're like 3 to 5 pages long, and there's a bunch of jokes in them, and something big happens, and there's a setup for what the next big thing will be. So almost always at the end of each of these chapters, you're going like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Very often it's like, oh, are they going to live? They're on the brink of death all the time. But yeah, it really does keep you very invested in moving forward. It's a really interesting combination of like thriller techniques with all this joke density and somehow it still works, right? Like it's a joke. So you know that probably it can't go too bad, but still when they're on the brink of death, you're like, well, I got to figure out how they survive this time. I better keep reading.
Yeah. Like any good like sitcom or something. And we'll discuss this more later, but obviously the first book was actually a series of radio plays released in 1978 first, and the second book. And then they were both retroactively written as novels. The later ones were novels first, but it has that serial feel, right? That we see a lot in science fiction, especially older science fiction, because that's how it was always published. But yeah, and as you pointed out, like a lot of the bigger questions kind of don't get resolved in the series. And sometimes they do in a satisfying way, but sometimes it kind of like bleeds over.
Yeah, or they just kind of like peter out. Like there's like one of the big mysteries. Can I talk about this? One of the characters in the first book is getting manipulated in like a strange way, and we're kind of curious to find out how, and then we kind of just keep not finding out for a very long time, and it kind of just becomes clear it's not that actually important for us to figure it out.
Right.
And that just does happen periodically. There's so many threads, and he doesn't try to tie them all up. That's not the point. But it is part of why the second book dragged is it's sort of pursuing a lot of these threads from the first book, but it also becomes clear it doesn't really matter how they end. And that incredible joke density and that density of events kind of get lost a little bit. There's a lot less happening, and it that's why it was harder to finish that second book. So anyway.
Yeah. And that kind of feeds into his, I think, purpose the point he's trying to make, which is kind of the meaninglessness. Everything has meaning, nothing has meaning. That it all feeds back into itself. That the storylines don't resolve.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, does it really matter if we don't answer these big questions? No, of course it doesn't. Yeah, you're totally right. That's the point of the books.
Right.
So anyway,
so it makes sense that there's some meta in there. So we have some people here. Arthur Dent is the human, the survivor of Earth. He's your basic British humbug character, played by Martin Freeman in the movie, which is funny because he's basically Bilbo Baggins.
he plays it the same way?
Yeah, well, it's just like Bilbo Baggins is also, kind of a humbug, but Bilbo Baggins gets out of his shell. I think Arthur Dent just kind of stays a little bit. I guess he does get out of his shell in the fourth book.
Book 4, he does some stuff.
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
Arthur Dent book 4 edition.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Martin Freeman, Arthur Dent, Bilbo Baggins. Then we have
Zaphod Beeblebrox. He's the president of the galaxy. He has 2 heads. And as far as I can tell, he's like the luckiest person who's ever lived. That's like his defining characteristic. Then we have Trillian, who actually also is from Earth.
Well, that's enough, Brent.
Yeah. You find that out real early. That's like page 20.
I know.
That first book is so dense.
I was just saying, like, you can,
That's a good,
good point. That's a good spot
point.
to.
Yep. Okay.
Ford Prefect is Arthur Dent's friend on Earth, who we quickly find out is an alien who's an editor for the eponymous Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a real book within the book that is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you can get cheap, what is it, for 30 Altarian dollars a day, see the galaxy for 30 Altarian dollars a day. It's like all the cheap tricks and best places to go in the galaxy, how to hitch rides. And then we
have Marvin, the depressed android, who I liked quite a bit. He's simultaneously like a very good problem solver and very depressed, and you kind of feel for him, but also like, yo, Marvin, get out of your own head. Anyway, and that kind of wraps up the major cast of characters. And there's just like, there's so many other people who come in and out of this book, mostly with like ludicrous names that are just like funny on their face.
Slarty Bart Fast.
Slarty Bart Fast. Zarny Whoop, the editor of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Fenchurch is a character who...
That's okay. Fenchurch is the name.
Yeah. It's even funnier when you learn why she's named Fenchurch. Anyway, okay. My favorite, just like one-liner character name, Loonquall. Anyway, so there's a lot of that going around. Just like... He's like, I have an excuse to throw a ridiculous name out there.
There's a character in one of them called Random Frequent Flyer, who's like an important character. Anyways, but like I said in my summary review, they're all pretty flat. They're sitcom characters. They have like very like one basic trait, and that's like their thing they lean on, and Adams uses it to make jokes.
Yes.
So, in one respect, flat, but also in another respect, now that I say that they're kind of like sitcom characters, like, I don't know that it's that important that they're flat or that they be more dynamic, because that's kind of like the purpose of the sitcom character, right? Just put them in funny situations and they say the line they always say.
Yep. Well, they usually say different lines, but yeah, always just in that incredibly dry. They're just like lucky British nitwits. Like they never have any idea what the fuck is going on. Constantly in horrible situations, and it always works out fine.
And I will say, I think Marvin the Android's kind of an early example of like a human personality. While he's not very dynamic, he's an early example of like a human personality on a robot, instead of like, what would robots be like? It's like, what would it be like if I made a depressed person
Yeah,
into
if I made like an incredibly smart robot, so much smarter than anyone on Earth, and then I like made them fetch pieces of paper from room to room, they probably wouldn't love it.
right. Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, and it all just it feeds into itself. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, and then just beyond the characters, I mean, just one of the biggest themes of the book is just like the world is full of assholes and idiots, like just absolutely chock full. Douglas Adams does not have a lot of general esteem for the average person or being.
Yeah. I would say it is the galaxy in this case. The world is gone.
That's true.
But yeah, not a lot of esteem. Not a lot of esteem for anything really, like the Vogon poetry, like art forms. He's kind of making fun of poetry, but also like people who are bad at poetry. He lists the worst poems and poets in the galaxy, and the number one worst poet in the galaxy was a woman who died on Earth, and no one had ever read her poetry.
Yep.
Anyways,
You should always bring a towel.
right. That's the other. That's another lesson.
And you should think quite a lot about the number 42.
Right.
These are important takeaways.
Right.
And it's all pretty pointless, as you may have noticed, but you should enjoy it anyway. That's like, honestly, the kind of the biggest, my biggest takeaway from the books is like, maybe don't worry about it all too much and just kind of enjoy the ride.
Yeah. It being existence, which is, it's kind of like the meaninglessness of the existential quest for why. And it's always really well done in comedy. This kind of take, like the positive spectrum of nihilism. It's always really well done through comedy, because it can feel uplifting, right? And not horribly depressing. The other end of the spectrum, everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. There's two sides of the same coin, or yin and yang, however you want to say it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think it totally worked. I mean, he made reading these books, it really feels like you get a sense for how Douglas Adams thinks about the world, and it's not such a bad way to think about things. It's really fun to spend a little bit of time in his brain, for sure. He's got yeah. Anyway, that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah. The way that it lands authentically is he's pointing out that it's kind of your responsibility to figure out how you want to assign purpose to your existence.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're constantly chasing like answers to the big questions. And we won't spoil any of the answers to the big questions, but it's not the kind of thing someone else can tell you, is kind of the underlying message here.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a fool's errand. Like, just you have to figure it out for yourself. There's no easy answer. There's no right answer. And this, the absurdity thing brings me to another thing that I wanted to talk about with you, which is I feel like the endings that hit me the hardest and feel the most authentic to me are not the ones that kind of resolve easily and like, like happily ever after, that kind of stuff. But the absurd and the bittersweet are like the two emotions that seem to be the most powerful in storytelling. And I'm wondering if you feel the same way.
I do and I don't. It depends on the book. I guess it also depends on my mood, frankly. But sometimes I think it's okay when like the girl and the guy find each other and get to, it all works out in the end. There's a certain kind of escapism in that's really nice. But I agree with you. It feels
a little disingenuous to like our lived experience. And I think that there's a point in that in storytelling, right? We tell the story sometimes because it's not real, and you try to make something real feel real, but then end it in a way that's unreal because we are all looking for that resolution. And so when we get it artificially, it's nice. But also, I think the best stories are ones that feel real and end in a real way, but also are still really emotionally impactful.
So I very much agree with that. What I will say in this series is I think that's part of why I liked So Long and Thanks for All the Fish so much. Is at the end we're kind of pursuing this big mystery the whole time. At the end we find out the answer
So
to
great.
that particular question.
So great.
And it's totally ridiculous and over the top. Whereas like Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which is basically just like a continuation of the questions in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like it doesn't feel like you ever actually, there just kind of isn't any resolution, you know what I mean? And that kind of also doesn't feel quite right. So I still want like an end, even if it is like a ridiculous joke. Just like, you know, let's end on a crescendo at least.
Well, maybe we'll dig into this when we get a bittersweet that we can work on, because that's a more powerful example, a more potent example to work with. But I think to say that number 2 is not satisfying I don't think that just kind of didn't end. So I don't know that that's the same as like having an ending that doesn't resolve. I think that just didn't have an ending.
Yeah, for sure. I know what you mean.
So okay, let's move on from my musings to some of the sci-fi stuff, the tech here. What are we looking at? Hitchhikers.
Yeah, it's basically like all soft sci-fi, just made up on the spot for the sake of a joke. Like it's mostly like about the name of the thing. That said, he does do a great job of like in the name of the thing, he explains what it does, which I think something the world could use more of. But they're mostly unimportant. There is one though that I do think we should talk about, which I think is pretty great. His faster than light drive, although there's other ones too. It's unclear why this one's better. But in any case, there is one that's better, which is the improbability drive. And as far as like made up ways to go faster than the speed of light go, like it's not the worst, honestly. It's pretty good.
And describe to us what the improbability drive is in the book. So for people who don't.
Sorry, I did gloss over that. The improbability drive is a faster than light, much faster than light star drive that improbably takes you wherever you want to go. As long as you can describe how improbable the outcome is you're hoping to achieve, then you can achieve it. And so it's just a sort of a zany way to go faster than light, and it involves all sorts of crazy stuff happening whenever they turn it on.
And it's also a hilarious vehicle for like excusing crazy stuff happening in the plot, right? It's like, because you could do whatever you want, no matter what, you know.
Yeah, that's right. It both led to like hilarious results, and like if we're gonna make up a way to go faster than the speed of light, let's just make it based on ridiculous, and let's be honest with ourselves about what we're doing here. I liked it quite a bit.
So we're talking not about the planet, but the galaxy here. Is that correct?
Big place. Yeah, they're constantly jumping between planets, hitchhiking between planets often. And the universe is just so big, and there's so many different species and races, but none of it really matters. Occasionally horrible things happen to giant other groups, just like happen to the Earth, and it's just not a big deal because there's so much other stuff happening. It's just, the book is almost told like from a galactic perspective, and from a galactic perspective, like what happens to any individual person or species or whatever, it's just like, no big deal. Yeah,
it plays into that like humanity's ego stripped from the galaxy. You know, atoms and the reader, we're all, everything's kind of insignificant. Everything can be taken for granted if you want. And that's a really a fun bend to take.
For sure it is.
And speaking of atoms, unfortunately, he died of a heart attack at age 49 in California when he was in the United States to help with the film for Hitchhiker's Guide. It seems like undiagnosed.
Yeah, he was working out at like a private gym and then had a heart attack, basically, right? So there was like nobody around to notice that he was having a heart attack.
It just happened really quickly. And so that was a loss for the world. Though I don't think he based on his books, I think his spiritual view is probably
Yeah, I don't think he'd be
wouldn't.
too upset with us, it's maybe like not a it's maybe not so bad that he didn't live to see the movie come out. It's
Right.
very bad, and I don't think he would mind us saying that.
Right.
So anyway,
He'd probably agree. So the other thing that's interesting about him is he wrote the radio plays at age 26, the first series of radio plays in that the novel was then derived from, that made him kind of famous overnight. 26 years old, and it was the first stereo program on the BBC in 1978. So they did like the full-on, music treatment. You get they did the Dolby, and they sound designed it. There were sound effects. Like, it sounds like it would have been a pretty wild thing to randomly hear in 1978 in Britain.
yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be like a sensation, like I don't know if it was like the same level as the War of the Worlds like radio broadcast, but like similar thing where it was like everybody was talking about this thing that was on the radio, and then it turned into this huge cultural phenomenon. And I mean, here we are. We're talking about the books. They came out 78, like almost 50 years ago now. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a life-changing, I don't know. Some things we take for granted, and they've just always been part of the zeitgeist and the canon, and sometimes you think about like, God, what would it have been like to have just heard that out of the blue and experienced it for the first time? Like, tell everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and they did. But on that note, I mean, this has inspired so much
Right.
other art. What are things that you feel like kind of capture this same like sort of tone and energy from the Hitchhiker's Guide that people might have,
Yeah, I mean,
more
just
recently?
like stuff that stands on its shoulders, like Futurama, Rick and Morty a bit, the new film by Daniels, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which you simply, if you have not seen this movie yet, you must see it.
It's like, I totally agree. It's so unbelievably good and very Hitchhiker's Guide-y. Yeah, it blew my mind too. Yeah, I totally agree.
We're all sci-fi fans here. Like, even non-sci-fi fans have loved this movie, and it's like one of my very favorite movies now. It's just perfect. Go see it. This is the Hitchhiker's Guide. This is what it feels like to be faced. When I was in that theater, I felt that, like, what is this? This is the best thing I've ever. Anyways, and then what was the last one? Oh yeah, Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. The series, well, by Daniel Butler, acting as Lemony Snicket. The you probably familiar with that series.
Incredibly horrible things happening, but you kind of know the whole time that it's all fine, and it's pretty funny along the way.
Yeah, just like puns, language play, all that stuff. All that being said, I think that Hitchhiker's Guide, it's obvious why it's in the canon and why people love reading it so much, and it's accessible to people at a younger age. It's kind of a good, like, preteen, like, discovery book. It's not too naughty, but it's not
YA for sure, but like, yeah, if you're like 13 or 14 or whatever and you read this, like, you'd feel like you were like a little naughty, but you're not actually really reading anything so bad. It's like the kind of adult book that a kid's gonna love. Yeah
And it certainly was for both of us, and it can be for you unless you're older than that, in which case you've probably either already read it or can read it as an adult, and it's still great. So there you have it. Let's Brent move on to maybe some similar recommendations.
For sure. I'm gonna go for similar books. I'm gonna go with Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. It's incredibly funny. It's irreverent, and I wanted an excuse to be able to recommend both Pratchett and Gaiman, who I both think are brilliant writers who have really interesting. Just everything they write is like suffused with some humor. And so anyway, those are a perfect book to be able to talk about both of them. So yeah, I highly, highly, highly recommend that one, and I highly recommend both of them.
Did you say Vonnegut? I'm sorry. Did I?
No, I was talking about Good
Space
Omens.
that?
No, you're
Okay.
Vonnegut.
Cool. Oh, we just like collectively were like Vonnegut, obviously. So go read some Vonnegut. And the recommendation I came up with is a newer book. It came out last year by the author Patricia Lockwood. It's called No One Is Talking About This. And it's just a like really funny. It's incredibly funny novel about a fictional woman who becomes a social media star overnight with the tweet. What's the exact tweet? Can a dog be twins? And it's written and it's formatted in a really interesting way. It feels like the internet, and it's just punch after punch of hilarious written prose. What's your last one?
I'll close this out with Bill Bryson, who is another just British author with a great sense of humor. I'm going to pick in particular Short History of Nearly Everything. There's a really amazing like illustrated version as well. The book is legitimately a short history of nearly everything. You're going to learn about like the history of the universe and the history of the earth, the history of humanity, in somehow all in a book that fits. And you're going to laugh a lot along the way. It's a really wonderful experience. And he's just a great writer. If you like him, there's a lot of really fun stuff he's written to check out. So anyway, yeah, that's a good one.
Sweet. Well, we love Hitchhikers. We hope you do too. And so long, and thanks for all the fish.
There you go.
There you go.
Keep reading, everybody. Bye.
Later.